It is a privilege to be here today. I traveled here from the United States primarily so that I could meet with many of you and meet with many folks in your government who are on the front lines fighting against cyber attacks every single day. A little bit on my background so you understand the frame of reference or context of what I'm telling you here today. I began my career as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, where I was chartered with defending Department of Defense networks against cyber attacks. My first job was to look at log files every single day to determine were we breached or not. And back in 1993, when I worked at the Pentagon, we did have breaches, and we lacked the data, the forensic capability to get attribution behind who's doing the breaches, and we didn't have the means to stop them. In 1993, as I responded to security breaches, I never thought that the problem would get worse and that I'd still be doing it 22 years later. But it is lots of fun. When we respond to security breaches, we answer two questions. The first question is, what happened? How did the bad guy break in? What information did they take? Was there anything about their attack that we can use to figure out who did it and get attribution? And how do we stop it? That's the second question. So first, what happened? Second question, what to do about it? And we've had the privilege at FireEye, and prior to that I was at a company called Mandia that FireEye purchased in 2013. We've had that privilege of answering those questions at over 1,000 companies. During this time frame, when we assist organizations in responding to security breaches, we get to help those companies transform their security from point A, the breach happened, to transform to point B, a more secure state. Today, I'm going to talk to you not just about my background, but about the threats we faced in 2014 and what to do about them. In 2014, we responded to 226 incidents, or at least I should say, we did 226 investigations to determine what happened and what to do about it. We did those investigations in 13 different countries. We inspected and did deep dive analysis of over 2 million systems last year. We have over 100 consultants that are on the front lines responding to cyber attacks every day. Those consultants found over 17,000 files last year during the course of our breach investigations that nobody had seen before. That's over 8 files per hour that we worked. People will say that's not a lot of files. That's not a lot of malicious code. I will tell you, those are the 17,144 files causing over 99% of the impact in the breaches that we read about today. Then on a daily basis at FireEye, we get an average of over 450,000 malicious files through our network, a consortium where we share malware, our sensors that are deployed everywhere, and through the incident responders that are submitting malware to our malware analysis teams to review. So we see a lot of malware. I want to give you a little bit of history on cybercrime from my personal perspective and what I experienced over the last 21 years. In 1993 through 1998, the incidents I responded to were governments attacking governments, and I responded on behalf of the United States Air Force to breaches into military bases during that time frame. We did not concern ourselves with the attractive nuisances, with the breaches that did not have much impact, such as web defacements or something like that. We only responded to government-on-government intrusions. In 1998, I left the military and went to a company, and we responded to incidents that started taking on a different flavor. We started responding to Eastern Europeans compromising networks to make money. And the attacks suddenly went from Unix machines hacking into Unix machines to Windows-based malware and attackers using Windows operating system to compromise Windows systems. In 2003, I saw another shift, a shift change in what I was responding to that led me to start the company Mandia in 2004. That shift was that we saw military units in China start to compromise non-government targets around the world. I recognize that is an unfair fight. When people who badge into work in a military uniform then hack into Campbell's Soup or a media and entertainment company or any other private sector organization that simply isn't ready to withstand an attack with the sophistication a military organization can have. And so we responded to lots of breaches between 2003 and today that I would attribute to Chinese cyber espionage. And of course the Russians were always doing it, but their rules of engagement are different than what we've observed the Chinese use over the years. In 2013, we saw what I consider the fourth change or shift change in the intrusions that I responded to and our teams responded to, is that we saw a direct correlation or relationship between geopolitical events and attacks, cyber attacks. Specifically, in August of 2013, the United States has a military doctrine where if any chemical weapons are used anywhere in the world, that crosses a red line, and we will intervene with force, with boots on the ground. That event occurred in August of 2013 when pro-Assad soldiers used chemical weapons against Syrian rebels. The United States chose not to abide or adhere to their doctrine, but we did threaten potential armed combat in Syria. The response to the United States even threatening armed combat in Syria led to cyber attacks by the Syrian Electronic Army, a pro-Assad group that threatened to attack our financial services and other critical infrastructure and cause damage or harm in cyberspace should U.S. military intervene in the Syrian rebellion. So fast forward to today, we now see a direct correlation or relationship between conditions in the Ukraine and the attacks being conducted by what we would attribute to state-sponsored Russian attacks. So I'm going to share with you what I learned in 2014 from these 226 investigations that we did. The first lesson: if your network can be compromised, it will be compromised. There are automated programs on the internet, carpet bombing networks with automated attacks looking for vulnerable systems. If these programs can break in, they will break in. That does not mean each breach has impact or consequence, but there's a lot of noise on the internet that we will want our security programs to quash and make not a problem. So all of us in this room will want a good enough security posture to eliminate the white noise that is created by these automated attacks. There are no risks or repercussions to compromising systems in South Korea or systems in Germany or compromising systems in the United States if you hack from these 4 countries. Right now, in many of the intrusions we respond to, we know exactly who conducted the intrusion. We know where they live. We know their names. We know the buses they take to class or to work. But they continue to hack in the United States unabated from Russia or China or Iran or North Korea. This list will grow. And many people ask me, why don't I put the United States flag on this sign? Maybe next year. The attackers target people and they exploit human trust. That's what makes it so hard to protect all your systems all the time. I'm providing you an example here of PLA Unit 61398 compromising a defense contractor in the United States. These emails are exactly what led to a break-in at this defense contractor. The attacker sent an email saying, "I think this will be of interest to you," to a gentleman named Mike. Mike responds, "You're sitting right next to me at this meeting. Why are you sending me an email?" The attacker responds, "This is a legitimate email." And all the email is a link to an armed PDF document. And if Mike clicks on that link, that armed PDF document would drop a backdoor onto Mike's system. And he did click on that link. In the 226 investigations we did in 2014, it is my personal estimate that over 90% of the breaches we responded to, spear phishing was the way the attackers broke in. And for every other incident we responded to, we didn't figure out how the attacker broke in, or the attacker broke in using a valid user ID and password that they got from a third-party provider to the victim organization. Notice that that whole attack took 8 minutes. The victim got an email, responded to it in 4 minutes. The attacker responded back in 4 minutes, and the compromise occurred. The other point I've learned over the last 20 years is that cyberspace has an imbalance between offense and defense. For every dollar somebody spends on an offensive capability, we have to spend thousands of dollars on defense to try to stop the attack. The advantage today goes to the offense. Because of that imbalance or asymmetry, you are seeing the United States creating law, an executive order from the president himself that states if there are state-sponsored attacks against the United States private sector, that we will reserve the right to respond not just in cyberspace, but by other means that are proportional and acceptable. So we have learned over the last 20 years in the United States that cyberspace is in fact imbalanced, that the offense has the advantage, and the only way to deter that is by responding outside of cyberspace. A frustrating lesson to learn if you're a chief information security officer or if you're in charge of security at an organization is that whatever security safeguard you put into place today, 3 months from now, it has lost some efficacy or effectiveness. There are lots of reasons for this. One is that the attackers will always adjust to the safeguards you put in place. Another thing I've observed during my career is that companies secure their networks after they've had a security breach. But over time, that victim mindset that we had been compromised and we had to kick the attackers out erodes, and people lose that constant effort to keep people off their networks. If your organization has not suffered a compromise in a year, your security attention span has decreased, making it more likely that you will be compromised in the near future. We have also seen companies that no matter what safeguards they put in place, they continue to be compromised by nation states. And their determination to prevent these attacks diminishes and lessens over time. Every company I've ever responded to on behalf of them after they've had a breach, we've seen these companies ramp up their security capability, and with no exception, over time, that capability has gone back down. If you've been compromised, and this is very true in the United States, and I don't know how true it is here in South Korea, but if you've been successfully hacked in the United States, and you know it, somebody else knows it as well. Right now, if there's an intrusion in the United States into an e-commerce site, a large retailer, or the defense community, or a bank, a lot of times these organizations learn they were breached the same day the United States public is learning these organizations have been breached. This creates an enormous challenge for the victim organizations to learn what happened and what we need to do about it as fast as possible. There are tremendous penalties in the United States if you've been breached. Those penalties are normally shareholder lawsuits and consumer-based lawsuits, and they tie companies up for years in this legal battle. The unfortunate reality is cyber attacks. When you are a victim of a cyber attack, many people conclude you were irresponsible instead of concluding that in fact you are a victim of a crime. It is one of the only criminal acts I am aware of where as a victim you are accused of irresponsibility. And hopefully over time, we can sway that opinion from, if you're compromised and you know it, that you are in fact a victim and not irresponsible. The majority of the companies that we help respond to incidents have mature security programs, have great technology, and have great people. They simply can't withstand cyber attacks that are being conducted by nation states and military units against their private organization. It is my opinion small and medium businesses lack the people or the knowledge or the capability to withstand the attacks that we respond to. This is a significant problem because all large organizations that are targeted in attacks are generally attacked by these small to medium businesses that are in fact victims themselves. If I am conducting cyber espionage from China, I don't attack straight from China into South Korea. What I would do is compromise a university or a small to medium business in South Korea that lacks the capability to detect this attack, and then I would launch my attack from that site. So the attacks that Chinese cyber espionage is doing in South Korea will look like it's coming from a South Korean small business. In the United States, it's the same thing. We have found thousands of small to medium businesses that were compromised by military units in China or state-sponsored attackers in China solely to create the attack infrastructure used against U.S. businesses. I don't have an easy fix for that problem. The next point we learned in 2014, and we learned it earlier than that, is that the next major conflict will have a cyber component to it. All of you in this room, if you are involved in cybersecurity, will be part of the next military conflict involving your nation. Because the cyber component will absolutely, of that war, will absolutely impact the civilian lifestyle. As we go to the Internet of Things, and your refrigerator can order you food, it'll be very interesting to see these cyber attacks materialize and do nuisances like impacting the civilian refrigerators to order more food, impacting civilian cars to improperly drive, impact your wearable devices that track your heart rate to propose or offer erroneous data. All these things will one day occur, and the victors of future conflicts will simply have faster software, better cyber attacks, and the means to use it. I'm going to focus now on cyber espionage, and then after a specific case on cyber espionage, talk about the top 4 threats we face by their sophistication. First, I will start with China, who has a large cyber espionage campaign against your country and many others. In 2013, the New York Times was compromised by a Chinese military unit. Unlike many victim companies, they could go public about it and not suffer severe consequences for telling people. The New York Times put in their press that we were compromised by China and that some consultants believe it was the Chinese military that did the attack. Those consultants were us. We planted that text in the article. The Chinese responded to that article by saying it is groundless and baseless to accuse our Chinese military of launching these attacks. That's the first time that the Chinese admitted the attacks were in fact coming from China. You have to think about that for a minute. But we said the attack was the Chinese military, and they responded, it wasn't our military. That's good. They finally admitted the attacks were actually coming from China. But that's not enough. So what we did is in February of 2013, my former company Mandia released a report on what we referred to as APT Group 1, otherwise known as PLA Unit 61398. In this report, we had the privilege of responding to 141 companies in the United States alone that had been compromised by this PLA unit. These companies were in over 20 industries. One was a university. One made soft drinks. One made missile systems. One was a telecommunications provider, oil company, refinery, insurance company, bank. The fact is, I can't think of an industry they did not compromise. The statistics we had technically were overwhelming that the attacks that we responded to at 141 companies, all those attacks led back to people who used the Chinese character set on their keyboard, and they were in Shanghai. The number one backdoor that PLA Unit 61398 used was Windows Remote Desktop. That is a program that ships with Microsoft Windows that allows remote access. When you use Remote Desktop to log into a network, you have to have a user ID and a passphrase. When PLA Unit 61398 used Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, they gave us the host name of the machine doing the connection in the Chinese character set. They gave us the keyboard setting that was Chinese character set for thousands of connections over 7 years. So we were very confident that we were right that there was a military unit compromising our private sector. We also used Google to investigate PLA Unit 61398. And just Googling for in the Chinese character set 61398, we found resumes. And some of these resumes said, I used to work at Unit 61398. They taught me to speak English. They taught me to hack. That was very helpful for us to understand the mission of that military unit. They also tried to compromise my company. This was an email that proposed to come from me to 2 of our employees. It wasn't me that sent the email. If you clicked on the details click here, you would download an armed PDF document. The attack didn't work. Every time we've seen the military units in China conduct cyber espionage, they've broken in using spear phishing. That's their number one way to break in. And how they do it is they send an email that looks to come from somebody you know, and the email has an armed office document in it, or an armed PDF document, or a link to a malicious Office or PDF document. When we released our public report, the Chinese government responded by confirming we were right. No, I wish that's the truth. They responded by chasing away reporters that went to Shanghai to see the office buildings used by PLA Unit 61398. The United States Senate made public statements confirming that we were correct. We did this in hopes that we would change the behavior of Chinese cyber espionage. Specifically, when the United States hacks and does offensive capabilities, we do so for security purposes, and we stay primarily government on government, and that's our targeting. What we observed the Chinese espionage units doing is hacking companies doing mergers and acquisitions in China, as well as hacking companies that were litigious against Chinese state-owned entities. So if your company may sue a Chinese company, their government would compromise you to gain unfair leverage in that litigation. We felt that all the technical solutions were being circumvented by PLA Unit 61398 because the companies they were hacking were multinational, had thousands of end users, and it was very hard to protect thousands and thousands of people when the bad guy only needs to break into one of them to get into the crown jewels of an organization. The slide I'm showing you right now shows you the impact the Mandia report had when it was publicized and exposed PLA Unit 61398. The dots in the bottom left are all the IP addresses and domain names we knew the PLA unit was using. The dotted line is the date we released our report exposing the unit. They never used the IP addresses and domain names that they were using prior to the report ever again. So we had impact. We changed their methods when we released this report. But we also created thousands of new victim organizations because all PLA Unit 61398 did is they stopped hacking for approximately 43 days, then started hacking again. Today it's at the same levels it's always been at. And they created a whole new infrastructure of victim companies to use as a pathway for the attacks that they're doing. So the lesson is the problem is here to stay. In 2014, the sovereign nation of the United States made the same accusation Mandia made by indicting 5 Chinese soldiers in PLA Unit 61398. This was done as a gesture to say, we know what you're doing. Can we have a dialogue to come up with rules of engagement that are more acceptable for cyber operations? Russia, probably the best hackers in the world. At Mandia, we had an 8-year time frame where every breach we responded to, we did not attribute to the Russian government. We had no visibility into what they were doing. In the late 1990s, I had the privilege to respond to the Russian government hacking the American military. In 2013 and 2014, we started responding to breaches by the Russian government again. The events that occurred that prompted this are the information released by Edward Snowden and the conflict in the Ukraine. we have seen the Russian government turn up the frequency of their intrusions, and they used to do great counter-forensics. They used to, when we responded to them, stop their activities. Today, they're doing slightly less counter-forensics. They are not stopping their activities when we catch them, hacking U.S. organizations or Eastern European governments or Western European governments. And that means they have changed their rules of engagement in cyberspace after 15 years. And the only reason why is because of the geopolitical situation in the world today. If you ever get an email and you open up a document in that email and then get prompted to log back into email again, don't fill it in. Don't put your user ID and passphrase in. This is one of the most popular ways we see the Russian hackers breaking in. It is a feature of your email program to get documents. It is a feature of Microsoft Office that you can open a document, and that document can open other documents or even populate the contents of a document from things on the internet. It is also a feature of a document to run Visual Basic scripts that can create another window on your screen. We saw the Russian attackers break into over 100 companies in late 2014 simply by sending an email with a document attached that when you clicked on that attachment, you got prompted to log back into your email. And if you put your user ID and password into this window, you are giving a Russian attacker your email, user ID, and passphrase. And that's bad. In 2013, we saw some additional attackers that we had never responded to before. We had the privilege of responding to Syrian attacks approximately 7 times in 2013 and 2014. I would say that the Russian capability is the top capability we have responded to. I feel the Chinese cyber espionage is probably number 2. I believe the Syrians would be at level 3 or level 4. They mostly attacked Western media. Even though I'm telling you I feel they're level 3 or level 4, I actually thought their attack methodology was very clever, hard to detect, and would work on virtually all Western media companies. I don't have the time to provide you all the details on the Syrian breaches because I'm saving that time for another country. We had the privilege of responding to Iranian-sponsored attacks a few times in 2013 and 2014 as well. Early in my career, I had the privilege of training many U.S. officials, FBI agents, NSA members, and others in how networks work and how to compromise those networks and how to investigate those compromises. It is my opinion that the Iranian attackers look just like the students I had right after they left class, meaning they were just leaving a lab environment and the Iranians were just starting to operationalize in real intrusions because it looks different. For example, in 2013, we responded to an Iranian intrusion into a U.S. company where the Iranian attacker wanted to take information from the U.S. company, in particular by using compression, known as RAR, RARing a file. What the Iranian attacker did is compressed every file on the victim machine. Instead of just the files they wanted, they compressed files that included the operating system itself and stole everything. That is sloppy form, and that is a technique that will get improved over time as these attackers get more real-world experience. In 2014, we had our first opportunity to respond to an intrusion attributed to North Korea. In my opinion, the attack against Sony Pictures and Entertainment combined four things I had never seen in a single security breach. Nation-state attacker compromised the private sector. We've seen that before, but then add to that, the attacker steals private data, private email, private communications, privileged legal documents, and posts them online. We call that releasing private material. Combine that with a third element of then destroying as much of the data as possible with wiping malware, intentionally written to be fast, to wipe everything as fast as possible and render the data unrecoverable, combined with the fourth element of a demand to do something or not do something. Those four things in one breach had never occurred before. It had some interesting results, and I'll speak to those results. First and foremost, it prompted our U.S. government to do things it had never done before. One, the director of our National Security Agency publicly stated and attributed the Sony attack to North Korea. The U.S. government does not do public attribution for different attacks. They don't step out publicly and say, here's who hacked J.P. Morgan Bank, or here's who hacked Citibank, or here's who hacked Home Depot, a popular retailer. But for some reason, when Sony was breached, the National Security Agency had their lead director, their top military officer, make an announcement. If that's not enough, the president made the same announcement. That is unprecedented in U.S. history. In addition to making that announcement, the president said that in cyberspace, the United States will now respond proportionately to nation-state-based attacks. We don't know what proportionate means. It is ill-defined. But even that is acting as a deterrent because people don't know what we will do the next time we have a breach like the Sony breach. Although it's ambiguous, it is still the first time we have ever made that statement at the presidential level. It also, during a statement, the president said that proportional does not mean we will limit our response to cyberspace. So what do we do about these attacks? Because the conclusion that I'm giving you for 2014 is that the majority of the threats are now state-sponsored. The majority of the threats your organizations will see are going to come from state-condoned and overlooked activities. The best choice we have is to eliminate the consequence of breaches. If you protect all your systems all the time, then nothing is important. The goal is to protect the systems that matter the most, to create a secure section of your networks that prevent compromises from having significant impact. For example, if you can't or you decide not to lose credit card data because you're a retailer or e-commerce site, you may state that we will not lose credit data. We will create a secure section of our network for credit data, and we'll make sure nobody can break into that section. So that even if somebody spear phishes one of our employees, that spear phishing can't lead to the loss of credit data. Every organization represented here today, you should all know what threats you do not want to have become a reality on your networks. And make sure your security programs are tailored so those threats do not become a reality. And the best way to do that is know which systems are the most important, what data is the most important, which of your customers are the most important, who of your employees have the most important communications and data, and make sure that those systems, that data, that information is so well safeguarded that should it be breached, you're the first to know and not anybody else, and you can eliminate the impact. I will leave you with the final thought that it is the goal of every company, should that security breach that's inevitable become a reality, to make sure you withstand third-party inspection from regulators, your government, your shareholders, even your employees may inspect what did we do to try to eliminate the impact of a breach. I am here in Korea for the next 2 days because we know the importance of international cooperation to be able to attribute any attack that happens against any of your companies to the rightful person who did the attack. If we want to know if North Korea hacked a private sector company in the United States, the answer may very well lie here in South Korea, working with your law enforcement, your intelligence agencies, and your government officials. And the same thing can happen in reverse. I thank you very much for your time. I am very excited to be here, and I know this, that I will be back again every time there's a severe attack and we need to figure out who did it, and you hold the key and you hold the answers. We will be here. If you ever need to come to the United States to learn who's behind an attack, what's the best threat intelligence, please give us a call. Thank you.